The Navy said the source was a plume that was released from the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant. The dose in this case is less than being exposed to radiation naturally in 1 month. The aircraft carrier was at sea about 160 kilometers northeast of the plant. A hydrogen blast occurred at one of its reactors on Saturday. The U.S. Navy says the Ronald Reagan and other 7th Fleet ships have been relocated. Countries are bracing for radioactivity leaked from nuclear power plants in Fukushima Prefecture. Russia is monitoring radiation levels every hour at the National Observatory in the Far East rather than conduct the country's usual daily checks. Officials at the observatory Monday evening. The outages started at 5 p.m. and lasted for about 90 minutes. On Sunday, the utility announced that electricity would be cut for selected areas for 3-hour periods on a rotating basis. The outages are designed to cope with a severe lack of electricity stemming from problems at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, which normally supplies power for the metropolitan area. The cuts were scheduled to begin on Monday morning, but lower than anticipated demand allowed the utility to continue full supply until 5 p.m. The firm says it will implement power cuts on Tuesday if demand for electricity exceeds supply. The Tohoku Electric Power Company, which supplies electricity to northeastern Japan, is considering similar outages. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to NHK Newsline. The Tokyo Electric Power Company says fuel rods in the No. 2 reactor of the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant may have been damaged and that radioactive materials have been detected nearby. The company said the fuel rods are likely to be fully exposed again. The company said at the news conference on Monday that the level of cooling water in the reactor dropped rapidly, exposing 80-centimeter length of the fuel rods at 5 p.m. Japan time. The firm added that the water level fell below a gauge measuring the level. The company also says it can't confirm whether the water level is rising and that the fuel rods may be fully exposed. The firm says it began injecting seawater into the reactor again at 8 p.m. and that it is doing all it can to prevent the fuel rods from melting. But it says again the fuel rod in the No. 2 reactor of the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant has been exposed. Around 11 p.m. local time, the valve cap automatically closed. As a result, air cannot be released from the reactor. The company indicated that the fuel rods may have overheated and began melting. It also reported to the government that the situation is an emergency. The radiation around the compound rose to its highest level of 3,130 microsieverts at 9:37 p.m. on Monday. That's 6 times higher than the permissible level. An international body monitoring nuclear testing says it will closely watch the situation at the nuclear power plant in earthquake-hit Fukushima Prefecture. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, or CTBTO, spoke to NHK on Monday following hydrogen blasts at 2 of the reactor buildings at the quake-damaged Fukushima No. 1 plant. The organization said no radioactive materials from the blasts have been detected so far by its facility in Takasaki City, about 200 kilometers southwest of the plant. The watchdog added that it will continue its 24-hour monitoring.
Anything that would happen within our mandates and within the detection capability of our station will be picked and then the information provided to our member state.
The Vienna-based organization has about 330 facilities around the world to observe radioactive materials in the atmosphere and tremors caused by nuclear tests. Multiple layers of safety systems are supposed to prevent nuclear accidents, especially meltdowns. But as the Fukushima nuclear crisis demonstrates, nature has challenged man's best plans. Here's what happened to get Japan into the state it's in now.
The first explosion blew out the top part of a reactor containment building at the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant. This footage inside the building was taken during a regular inspection. The nuclear reactor is housed behind this robust wall. This is what a nuclear reactor looks like. The uranium inside the fuel rod inside the reactor undergoes nuclear fission. The rods emit heat, generating energy. Usually water cools them to maintain their temperature at 270 degrees Celsius. But if the cooling fails, the temperature could rise to over 1200 degrees. This temperature is hot enough to melt the fuel rods. When the earthquake hit, the first safety system to prevent a meltdown was activated. Control rods rose into the reactor to stop the nuclear fission. As planned, the reactor stopped operating. But the fuel rods were still hot. Water should have been circulated to cool them down. However, this didn't happen because of a power outage right after the quake. So the second safety system turned on. The emergency diesel power generator began spraying the rods with coolant. But an hour later, something unexpected happened. Without warning, the emergency generator stopped. Around this time, the tsunami, possibly as high as 10 meters, hit the power plant. Experts think this is what caused the generator to fail. Now, the third safety system started operating. It converts steam traveling through the pipes into water. It cools the rods. But the water level went down, and the temperature continued to rise. All three safety measures had failed. Professor Akira Omoto of the Japan Atomic Energy Commission was involved in construction of the Fukushima plants. He thinks the cooling water somehow leaked from the reactor.
The reactor's coolants must have leaked somewhere in the building. We thought we had taken adequate precautions for a tsunami, but what happened was beyond our expectations.
To forcibly cool the reactor, seawater had to be pumped into it and the containment vessel. Similar failures and a huge explosion also hit another reactor at the plant on Monday. Once again, nature has challenged man's best efforts.
The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet says 17 crew members have been exposed to low levels of radiation that was released from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. The crew was on 3 helicopters from the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan. They were conducting rescue operations outside Sendai City. According to the 7th Fleet, they were detected with low levels of contamination. But it says the radioactive materials can easily be removed with soap and water. It has not detected any more contamination. The helicopters were also coated with radioactive traces that had to be washed off. The Navy said the source was a plume that was released from the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plant. The dose in this case is less than being exposed to radiation naturally in 1 month. The aircraft carrier was at sea about 160 kilometers northeast of the plant. A hydrogen blast occurred at one of its reactors on Saturday. The U.S. Navy says the Ronald Reagan and other 7th Fleet ships have been relocated. Countries are bracing for radioactivity leaked from nuclear power plants in Fukushima Prefecture. Russia is monitoring radiation levels every hour at the National Observatory in the Far East rather than conduct the country's usual daily checks. Officials at the observatory in Vladivostok told NHK that their data show no irregularities and that no leaked radiation seems to have reached the region. The observatory is to continue its intensive monitoring until the safety of the Japanese plants can be ensured. A French team of 12 experts trained to deal with nuclear accidents is to arrive in Japan on Monday evening. The team is equipped to decontaminate and treat people exposed to radiation and is expected to coordinate with Japan's government. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which controls nuclear power plants in the country, has sent 2 experts to Japan. 3 days after the earthquake, aftershocks continue. A magnitude 6.2 quake hit Ibaraki Prefecture north of Tokyo on Monday.
That radioactive substances that melt in water will come out of this wall. Now, the values of this radioactive reading, what is the latest information? In the area around the number 1 power plant, right after the explosion, 965.5 microsievert per hour was the level. However, after that, this figure went down. And an hour later, at 7:05, it went down to 387.3 microsievert. So these figures, compared to normal days, it is high. However, is radiation still seeping out? Well, right after the explosion, it went up, but after that, it's gone down. So maybe the leakage could have been stopped. But after the explosion, we do see the figure going up. Once, therefore, some kind of damage could have occurred to let the radioactive material go outside. That is a possibility that we have to think about. And this is the first kind of accident, a very serious accident that has occurred in the history of nuclear power plants here in Japan. Now, there are still some people within the 20-kilometer radius from the power plant. Well, yes, people outside of this 20-kilometer radius would be okay, but there are people who can't evacuate outside the 20-kilometer area. If radioactive substances have been dispersed, for example, if they are in hospitals, they should remain inside the building. If they have to go out for some reason, make sure that they take precautions so that don't breathe in the radioactive substance. For example, cover your mouth with towels or wear a mask. Now, Professor Sekimura, the Chief Cabinet Secretary, said that this is not an incident that would directly cause or immediately cause harm to residents. Well, yes, that is an important...
It's very difficult because we don't know what's happening exactly. But if any damage occurs to the container vessel, and then restoration will be very difficult. Fuel rods are exposed, and in the container vessel, the radiation level is quite high, and operators are also being moved to safer locations. So it's very difficult to take corrective measures immediately. So the first thing we have to do is to grasp the situation accurately, what's going on right now. And if TEPCO already grasped the information and knows what's going on, and then the company must disclose this information as accurately as possible, as quickly as possible. The Tokyo Electric Power Company's response has been not so appropriate so far. The explanation by the Tokyo Electric Power Company has been very unclear so far in the news conferences. And information sharing is very slow, the process of sharing information. And radiation cannot be felt, or we cannot smell radiation. So the residents living near this power plant are very much concerned. If the company says that this does not impose any
valve to vent steam and reduce pressure inside the reactor had closed, and they were trying to open it when the explosion occurred. It says it cannot deny the possibility that the fuel rods are melting. The company has been battling to raise the water level in the container vessel to cool the fuel rods. The company said half of the rods are still exposed.